Have you ever found yourself in a place where the world around you seems to disappear, and for a brief moment, everything just feels right? That's how it was for young Daniel, a boy who found peace and hope in the quiet corners of a park. But even in his peaceful retreat, Daniel longed for something more, a bond, a connection that could bring warmth to his heart. One day, his quiet life takes an unexpected turn when a chance encounter with a mysterious man sets off a chain of events that will change everything. From solitude to friendship, from loss to redemption, this story will take you on an emotional journey that reminds us of the power of kindness, forgiveness, and second chances. You won't want to miss how it all unfolds. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Every dawn, when the park lay blanketed in the soft hues of morning light, and the world seemed to move at a gentler pace, an 8-year-old boy named Daniel found solace in the quiet corners of this peaceful retreat. Here, life slowed down. The distant hum of the city was but a whisper, and the park became his personal sanctuary, a place where the chaos of his home life could not follow. The delicate scent of dew-laden grass floated on the breeze, while the early rays of sunlight kissed the landscape with a tender warmth. The air was alive with the melody of birds greeting the day, their soft chirps harmonizing with the gentle rustling of leaves. For Daniel, this was not just a park, it was a haven of tranquility where he could lose himself in a world of his own making. His small, fragile frame moved with a hesitant grace, as though his thoughts lingered in a distant realm far removed from the reality around him. His oversized glasses, perched precariously on his nose, magnified his large, soulful brown eyes, eyes that seemed to be perpetually searching for something beyond his reach. Daniel's urgency wasn't one of physical haste, but of a child yearning to escape into the only place that made sense to him, his imagination. Books were his companions, his steadfast friends in an otherwise lonely existence. Through them, he journeyed to distant lands brimming with adventure, bravery, and unwavering loyalty, qualities that seemed to elude him in his own life. His slender fingers would reverently trace the well-worn pages of his beloved novels, each touch a connection to worlds far more vibrant and accepting than his own. In these stories, Daniel wasn't just the quiet, misunderstood boy. No, in these tales he was a knight, a hero, someone of importance, someone who mattered in a way that reality never allowed. At home, however, his parents couldn't comprehend his insatiable hunger for stories. His mother, weary from the trials of life, would watch with tired eyes as he lost himself in the pages of yet another book. "You're ruining your eyesight with all that reading," she would sigh, her voice heavy with concern. "Why don't you go outside and play like other kids? Your friend calls for you, but you never notice. It's like you don't care at all." But how could Daniel explain that these books were his lifeline? They were the only escape he had from the endless arguments that echoed through their small house, arguments that made him feel small, insignificant, and powerless. His father's voice would cut through the air, filled with frustration. "When I was his age, I was out fishing, helping my father with real work. He's always got his nose in those books, lost in some fantasy. How's he ever going to survive in the real world? What kind of man will he grow up to be?" Those words, spoken with such careless certainty, hurt Daniel more deeply than his father would ever know. Each stinging remark pushed him further into his imaginary worlds, places where no one could tell him he wasn't enough, where he could be whoever he wanted to be. Every day after school, while other children laughed and played, Daniel would quietly slip away to the park. Beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree, he would find his refuge. The bench beneath its protective canopy became his throne, and the books he read were his escape. The leaves around him had begun to turn shades of gold and amber, signaling the coming of autumn, but to Daniel, they only added to the magic of his hidden sanctuary. On this particular day, he opened a new book, Lassie, by Eric Knight, and allowed himself to be swept away by the tale of unwavering courage and loyalty, two virtues he desperately longed to experience in his own life. In the world of pages, Daniel felt truly alive. His deep love for animals, especially dogs, was a beacon of hope in his otherwise lonely existence. He dreamt endlessly of having a dog of his own, a loyal companion who would stand by him through thick and thin, someone who would never leave him behind. But his father had always been resolute in his refusal. No dog, no friend, no escape from the loneliness that pressed heavily on Daniel's small shoulders. And so, day after day, Daniel left a bright red apple on the same park bench for an old homeless man who had become part of his world. This simple act of kindness gave him a sense of purpose, a connection to something bigger than himself. But one fateful day, as Daniel approached the bench, expecting to see the familiar figure of the old man, he was instead met with an unexpected sight. A man, sharply dressed and surrounded by imposing bodyguards, sat in the old man's place. Confusion and a deep sense of unease washed over Daniel, as though his safe, predictable world had suddenly shifted, leaving him teetering on the edge of something unknown and frightening. His father's voice echoed in his mind, harsh and unyielding. "Again with your foolishness. Dogs only bring fur and endless trouble. You have to feed them, walk them, and for what? Entertainment? Absolutely not. There will be no dog in my house." His father would declare, crushing every one of Daniel's heartfelt pleas. No matter how much Daniel yearned for the unconditional love of a loyal companion, his father's stubborn refusal was an immovable wall. It left Daniel to admire animals from a distance, living vicariously through the pages of stories where friendship was marked by wagging tails and warm, wet noses. With Lassie cradled in his hands, Daniel had already ventured halfway through the novel, captivated by the dog's bravery and unwavering devotion. The way Lassie faced every danger without hesitation, driven by pure love and loyalty, filled Daniel with awe. But as he turned the pages, a familiar pang of envy tugged at his heart, envy for the characters who were never truly alone, who had steadfast companions to walk beside them through every trial. In Daniel's eyes, Lassie was more than just a dog. She was the embodiment of the friendship and loyalty he so desperately craved. And as the longing within him grew, so did his dream of one day finding a friend who would stand by his side with the same fierce loyalty. As the day slipped away, the hours seemed to vanish in a blur of quiet contemplation for Daniel. Lost in the labyrinth of his thoughts, he barely noticed the sun's slow descent, casting long, golden shadows across the park. What had been a hub of activity just hours ago was now a quiet sanctuary, a world that seemed to exist only for him. The park's paths were nearly empty, save for the gentle rustling of leaves in the soft breeze and the distant hum of the city, which seemed a million miles away. The towering oak tree, its branches stretching protectively over him, became a fortress, a place where the weight of the world could not touch him, where the cacophony of his home life could be drowned out by the stillness. Here, in this secret refuge, Daniel found the peace he so desperately sought, returning day after day to chase the elusive freedom that reality so often denied him. But then, a noise of faint disturbance pulled him back from the safety of his mind. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to tug at the edges of his awareness, urging him to close his book and return to the present. He hesitated, his gaze still lingering on the pages before finally lifting his eyes to survey the world around him. At first glance, everything appeared unchanged. The sparrows continued their cheerful chatter, hopping playfully through small puddles with an innocent joy that Daniel envied. The trees whispered their ancient secrets to the wind, and a few joggers, lost in their own worlds, passed by with determined expressions, as if racing against time itself. But then, something, or rather, someone caught Daniel's attention. On a nearby bench sat a man, his appearance rough and worn, a testament to a life that had weathered countless storms. His thick beard and tattered clothes told the story of endless hardship, of long days and cold nights. His shoes, riddled with holes, had clearly walked many unforgiving miles. Yet, despite the man's rugged exterior, There was a softness to his face, an unexpected kindness in the lines etched by years of struggle. His eyes, crinkled at the corners, held a warmth that Daniel found strangely comforting. But it wasn't just the man who captured Daniel's attention, it was the large black dog at his side, its tail wagging with unbridled enthusiasm, clearly yearning for affection. "Getting hot?" Boy, the man asked in a gentle, affectionate tone, running a weathered hand over the dog's head. "Want to play?" "Go fetch," he added with a grin, hurling a stick across the park. The dog, full of boundless energy, leapt after it, its tail a blur of excitement. Moments later it returned, stick in mouth, eyes gleaming with joy and anticipation for the next throw. The two were an unlikely pair, yet they seemed to reflect each other in so many ways. The man with his ragged clothes and worn-out shoes, and the dog, with its matted fur and tired appearance, both bore the visible scars of difficult lives. But beneath the surface of their rough exteriors, they radiated something deeper, a quiet joy, a bond that transcended the trials they had faced. Despite the harshness of their outward appearances, both man and dog glowed with a contentment that seemed almost out of place in the somber park. Their shared laughter and playfulness lit up the space around them, a testament to the power of simple pleasures and the resilience of the human and canine spirit. In their connection, Daniel saw something he had longed for his entire life: a friend, a companion, someone who would never leave his side, no matter how tough life became. As Daniel watched them from a distance, something deep within him stirred. In that brief, fleeting moment, he saw everything he had ever dreamed of: a bond built on loyalty, love, and unspoken understanding. The man's laughter, the dog's wagging tail, the ease with which they navigated the world together, it was all a powerful reminder of what Daniel craved most. And as he watched them disappear into the fading light, he knew, with a deep certainty, that one day he too would find his own lassie, a friend who would stand by him through thick and thin. After a few more rounds of joyous stick tossing, the man decided it was time to rest. With hands roughened by life's challenges, he reached into the deep pockets of his tattered coat and pulled out a small loaf of bread, a worn bottle of water, and a pack of kefir. With careful precision, he broke the bread in half, offering one piece to his loyal companion. The dog's eyes sparkled with gratitude as it accepted the offering, its tail wagging in appreciation. The man poured water into a humble plastic cup and set it before the dog, who eagerly lapped it up. Meanwhile, the man took slow, deliberate sips of his kefir, his gaze drifting over the peaceful park as he savored the quiet contentment of the moment. When their modest meal was finished, the man looked down at his dog with a fond smile and said, "Well, buddy, lunchtime's over. Time to get back to work." With calm purpose, he rose from the bench, patted his faithful companion affectionately, and together they made their way toward the park's exit. The dog followed loyally, not bound by a leash but by the invisible thread of love and trust that connected them. A bond forged in the fires of shared hardship and unwavering devotion. From his hidden perch beneath the ancient oak tree, Daniel had been quietly observing the scene unfolding before him. His heart, so often burdened by loneliness, began to swell with something unfamiliar yet soothing, an emotion that he would later recognize as hope. A gentle smile tugged at his lips, a small, unspoken expression that carried more meaning than any words he could muster. Watching the man and his dog slowly disappear down the winding path, Daniel came to a quiet realization: true friendship wasn't about grand displays or lavish gestures. No, it was woven into the small, tender moments shared between souls: the unspoken understanding, the gentle glances, the simple joy of just being together. Sitting on a weathered bench beneath an old, protective tree, sharing a crust of bread with a loyal friend, that was happiness in its purest form, untainted by the complexities of life. And in that simplicity, Daniel glimpsed the essence of freedom, of connection, of what it truly meant to be alive. These reflections wrapped around him like a warm blanket, gently cradling his heart. His smile grew a little wider, a little more confident, as his mind raced ahead to a day he knew would come when he, too, would have a faithful dog of his own. One day he thought with quiet determination, when I'm grown and living on my own, I'll have a dog just like Buddy. We'll walk through this very park, side by side, and we'll share every crust of bread, every joyful moment, and even the darkest sorrows. The image was so vivid, so tangible, that for a brief moment, it felt as if his future companion was already there, by his side, walking with him through the soft grass of the park. But as always, reality had its way of intruding. The shadows had stretched long and deep, and the gentle light of evening had begun to settle over the park. Reluctantly, Daniel made his way home, the thought of his parents' inevitable questions tugging at the edge of his peace. He hoped they would be too distracted by their own concerns to notice how late he had stayed out. The night air was unseasonably warm for September, and as he walked, his heart was already looking ahead to tomorrow, eager for another day of escaping into Lassie's adventures and observing the quiet companionship of the old man and his dog. The park had become Daniel's refuge, a sanctuary where he could retreat from the noise and confusion that filled his life. Each day, he told his parents that he was meeting up with friends, but in truth, his afternoons were spent alone on that familiar bench. Books remained his closest companions, but now there was something more that drew him back to the park each day, a quiet fascination with the old man and his dog. Like clockwork, they appeared at the same time every afternoon, and their routine was always the same. They played together, shared their simple meals, and basked in each other's company with a comfort and ease that Daniel couldn't help but admire. With each passing day, Daniel's admiration for the old man deepened. He was captivated by the gentle way the man treated his dog, as though Buddy were not just a pet, but an equal, a true companion. There was a profound respect in their relationship, a quiet understanding that spoke volumes without a single word. It reminded Daniel of an old married couple who had weathered countless storms together, bound by a love that no longer needed to be spoken. Their connection was built on shared experiences, on silent forgiveness, on a kind of love that only deepened with time, a bond that was as resilient as it was tender. Day after day, Daniel watched this pair from the shadows, his heart filling with light as he witnessed their quiet joy. The sight of them brought him a sense of peace, a reassurance that even in a world filled with struggles, such pure, simple happiness was possible. Their laughter, their companionship, became a beacon of hope for him, a glimmer of something better, something worth waiting for. And in his young heart, he held on to the belief that one day he too would find his own loyal friend. Someone who would walk by his side through all of life's ups and downs, sharing not just bread but the entire world. Today, as Daniel settled beneath the comforting branches of the familiar oak tree, he tried to lose himself in his book as he had done so many times before. Yet his focus wavered, and his eyes drifted toward the empty bench where the old man and his dog once sat, their companionship a quiet, reassuring presence in his life. The sight of the vacant bench sent a pang of unexpected sorrow through his heart, a heavy ache of loss for something he had barely begun to understand. Maybe they won't come back, he thought, a wave of uncertainty pressing down on him. Despite how much they had come to mean to him, he realized with a jolt that he knew so little about them. They had become a fleeting yet significant part of his world, like a dream that fades away as morning breaks. Just then, a soft rustling near his feet interrupted his thoughts. Startled, Daniel glanced down and noticed a small, worn-out figure lying in the grass, a forgotten toy, abandoned by someone who had passed through the park. He carefully picked it up, feeling the rough, weathered texture of the faded plush beneath his fingers. It was a tiny dog, its frayed collar a testament to years of love and wear. As he held the toy in his hands, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a coincidence. Perhaps it was a sign, a reminder that even in the vast, unpredictable world, we are all destined to find a friend, sometimes when we least expect it. The toy seemed to whisper that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple through the world, touching lives in ways we might never fully grasp. As these thoughts settled in his mind, Daniel's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the setting sun bathed the park in a warm, golden light. The sun's rays filtered through the leaves of the old oak tree, casting everything in a soft, amber glow. The gentle breeze rustled the pages of his book, and for a brief moment, Daniel allowed himself to dream. Perhaps tomorrow would bring something different, something new. Maybe tomorrow, he would find his own loyal companion, a friend to fill the empty spaces in his life. With this newfound hope warming his heart, he returned to his book, letting the soothing sound of the wind in the trees carry him away to distant lands and the promise of future possibilities. The next day dawned like any other, yet for Daniel, there was a strange, almost magical sense of change in the air. The crispness of the autumn morning seemed to crackle with potential, as if something extraordinary was waiting just beyond the horizon. As he walked along the well-worn paths of the park, the crunch of fallen leaves beneath his feet echoed his thoughts, each step bringing him closer to something unknown yet thrilling. Today, however, he chose to take a different path, a quieter, less traveled route that led him to a secluded corner of the park, where an old, isolated bench sat beneath the shade of towering trees. This was the bench where the homeless man and his dog often spent their time together. Memories of the man and his dog filled Daniel's mind as he approached the bench. In the short time they had been a part of his life, they had brought a spark of light to his quiet, solitary world. They had shown him the beauty of simple companionship, the profound warmth of shared moments that didn't need words. That morning, as Daniel was preparing for school, his mother had slipped an apple into his backpack, a simple gesture of care. But now, as Daniel held the apple in his hands, he realized it could be something more, a gesture of gratitude, a small symbol of the friendship he yearned to give in return. When he reached the bench, it was still empty. The man and his dog had not yet arrived. Glancing around to make sure he was alone, Daniel placed the apple gently on the bench, a quiet offering of kindness, a token of his unspoken admiration. He took a few steps back and found a spot on the ground where he could sit and watch from a distance, his heart racing with a mix of hope and anticipation. Would his small act be noticed? Would it make a difference? As he waited, it felt as though the entire park was holding its breath with him, each rustle of leaves and distant chirp of birds adding to the quiet excitement that filled the air. Time seemed to stretch infinitely as Daniel sat in his secret spot, each second stretching longer than the last as he watched the scene unfold. The park, normally so full of distant noise, felt eerily still, save for the gentle rustling of leaves carried by the soft morning breeze. Every sound seemed amplified in the quiet, each rustle of leaves, every chirp of a distant bird, echoing through the park like a quiet symphony. Then, finally, Daniel heard the faint, steady sound of footsteps that made his heart race with anticipation. He saw them, the old man and his dog, making their way slowly toward the familiar bench that had become part of his daily ritual. Holding his breath, Daniel watched as the old man's eyes fell upon the apple resting on the bench. The man stopped, his expression one of mild surprise, and he scanned the park as if searching for the mysterious person who had left this unexpected gift. A gentle smile crept across his face as he picked up the apple, turning it over in his hands, as if marveling at the simple yet thoughtful gesture. Then, with the same tenderness he always showed toward his loyal companion, he split the apple in two, offering half to the dog. The dog, tail wagging in excitement, eagerly took the piece of fruit and began munching on it with delight. The old man, still smiling, sat down on the bench and took a bite of his own half. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a small, insignificant moment, but to Daniel, it was so much more. It was a profound realization that, without uttering a single word, he had managed to touch someone's life, if only for a brief moment. The warmth of that realization spread through him, wrapping his heart in a sense of connection he had never felt before. For so long, the world had seemed distant, cold, and unreachable, But now, sitting in the shade of the oak tree, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of pride. He had discovered that even at his young age, he had the power to bring joy to others, just as the stories in his books had brought joy to him. The day passed, but the feeling lingered, reverberating in his soul like the melody of a song that stays with you long after it has ended. And with this newfound sense of purpose, Daniel made a quiet promise to himself he would continue this small tradition. The old man and his dog had become more than just strangers in the park. They had become symbols of kindness and connection in his life. The next morning, as the soft light barely touched the tops of the oak leaves, Daniel made his way back to the park. His heart brimmed with purpose, making his steps lighter, almost as if he were gliding through the park. What had started as a simple gesture had grown into something more, a source of joy that gave meaning to his otherwise solitary days. The quiet ritual of leaving an apple for the old man and his dog had become a secret joy, a small act that made him feel connected to the world around him in a way he hadn't before. This particular morning was crisp and refreshing, the cool air carrying the unmistakable scent of autumn's arrival. The leaves were beginning to change, their summer greens shifting into rich shades of gold and copper, hinting at the changing season. The park was peaceful, nearly empty, with only the occasional sound of squirrels rustling through the leaves as they gathered acorns for the colder days ahead. Daniel had carefully selected the best apple from the basket in the kitchen, filled with fresh fruit his mother had bought the day before. The thought of doing something meaningful, of continuing this new tradition, filled him with warmth as he approached the familiar bench. He placed the apple gently on the cold wooden seat, then quickly retreated to his usual hiding spot behind a nearby tree, his heart pounding with excitement. Soon enough, the familiar sound of footsteps reached his ears. The old man and his dog were approaching, just as they always did. Daniel's heart raced as he watched the old man notice the apple. A spark of joy lit up the man's tired eyes, his face softening into a look of surprise and gratitude. For Daniel, it was like witnessing a small piece of magic unfold. As he had done the day before, the old man split the apple in two, sharing it with his eager companion, who happily wagged his tail as he devoured his portion. In that moment, Daniel felt an invisible connection to the two of them, a bond that didn't need words to exist. He was part of their world now, even though they didn't know it. The simple act of kindness he had begun had created a link between them, one that filled Daniel with a sense of purpose and belonging he had never felt before. After the old man and his dog finished their snack, the man paused. He glanced thoughtfully in the direction of the tree where Daniel was hidden, his gaze lingering as if he somehow sensed he wasn't alone. Daniel held his breath, his heart thudding in his chest. "Does he know I'm here?" he wondered, his mind racing with a mix of excitement and nerves. The park seemed to grow quieter in that moment, as if the very air was holding its breath along with him. The old man's soft smile lingered in Daniel's memory as he whispered something to his dog, then slowly made their way out of the park. Daniel exhaled a quiet sigh of relief, his heart still racing with excitement from the moment. It seemed that with each passing day, his bond with the old man and his dog grew deeper, even if it was a bond that remained unspoken. He began to notice the little things, how the old man spoke to his dog with a tender tone, how they played together with a natural ease, and how the dog seemed to understand every word and gesture as if they shared a secret language known only to them. Watching this simple, yet profound relationship filled Daniel with a sense of peace and hope. It was as if the world, which had once felt so lonely and distant, was slowly revealing its softer side. The old man and his dog became his quiet teachers, showing him that companionship didn't have to be grand or extravagant. It could be found in the smallest moments, in the gentle routines that made life feel a little more connected. And so, as Daniel sat under the shadow of the mighty oak tree, he knew that he would return again and again, leaving behind small acts of kindness, and, in doing so, discovering more about himself. These fleeting moments in the park were beginning to shape Daniel's understanding of life in ways he hadn't anticipated. Each time he observed the old man and his loyal dog, he absorbed lessons about loyalty, friendship, and the quiet beauty found in life's simplest pleasures. He began to realize that being a friend wasn't just about being present, it was about understanding, about showing up in both small and significant ways. The thought stirred something deep within him, a yearning to be that kind of person for someone else, just as the old man had been for his dog. That morning started like many others, with the sun gently kissing the earth as Daniel made his way along the familiar path. The crisp autumn breeze brushed against his face, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of change. In his hand, he held another perfect apple, its red skin glistening with dew that caught the sunlight like tiny stars. The weight of the fruit was comforting in his palm, a symbol of the quiet ritual that had come to mean so much to him. But as Daniel approached the familiar bench, he stopped in his tracks. His usual spot, the one where the old man and his dog should have been, was occupied. His heart skipped a beat, anxiety gripping his chest as he took in the unfamiliar scene before him. A young man, sharply dressed in an elegant suit, sat where the old man should have been. His appearance was a stark contrast to the simple, worn-out figure Daniel had come to expect. Standing nearby was a tall, imposing figure in black, his rigid stance marking him as a bodyguard. Daniel instinctively stepped back, retreating into the shadows of the trees, his mind racing with confusion and concern. Who were these strangers, and why were they sitting on the bench where the old man and his dog should have been? The apple in Daniel's hand suddenly felt heavier, as if burdened by the weight of the unexpected turn of events. His nerves frayed, and he clutched the fruit tighter, unsure of what to do next. The young man on the bench kept glancing at his watch, his face etched with frustration. He seemed agitated, his brow furrowed as though he was waiting for something or someone. Meanwhile, the bodyguard, with his cold, calculated gaze, scanned the park with quiet intensity, his eyes never resting for long on any one spot. Then, in a sudden burst of emotion, the young man grabbed his head in exasperation, muttering something to the bodyguard before rising to his feet. He began pacing back and forth along the path, his agitation clear in every step. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears as adrenaline surged through his body. His curiosity gnawed at him, urging him to uncover the mystery of these strange visitors, but a deep sense of apprehension held him back. He stayed hidden behind the curtain of green bushes, peeking through the leaves as he watched the young man with growing intrigue and unease. The man seemed lost in thought, his gaze distant, as though searching for answers in the emptiness before him. The air around them felt heavy, thick with unspoken tension, and Daniel could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, making him feel small and uncertain in the face of this unexpected encounter. Time seemed to drag on endlessly, each minute creeping by with agonizing slowness as Daniel remained concealed in his hidden vantage point, eyes fixed on the unsettling scene before him. Every passing second felt like an eternity, amplifying the anxiety that churned within his chest, tightening its grip on his heart like invisible hands. The longer he waited, the more the unease built inside him, swirling like dark storm clouds on the horizon, threatening to consume him. His mind raced, bombarded by questions that spiraled out of control, each more disconcerting than the last. Where could the old man and his dog possibly be? They were always here, showing up with the same dependable regularity, their presence a constant in Daniel's world. Their sudden absence was like a jarring note in a familiar song. Something was undeniably wrong. Maybe they saw these strangers coming and decided to steer clear, Daniel thought, his imagination spinning out wild possibilities. Maybe they changed their usual route, trying to avoid these unfamiliar faces. The thought that these unknown men could have disrupted the comforting routine of the old man and his dog filled Daniel with a creeping sense of dread. The man in black, with his cold, calculating eyes, seemed to carry an air of menace that unsettled Daniel to the core. Who are they? What are they doing here? And why this bench, of all places? For their strange meeting, the questions buzzed in his mind like a swarm of restless bees, refusing to quiet down, refusing to let him find peace. As he continued to watch from the shadows hidden among the trees, Daniel's sense of unease only deepened. His once familiar world felt like it was slipping away, intruded upon by these strangers who carried with them a weight of mystery and hidden motives that Daniel couldn't begin to comprehend. The park, which had always been his sanctuary, now felt uncertain, the comfort of its quiet corners replaced by an eerie sense of unfamiliarity. Yet despite the fear gnawing at his insides, Daniel couldn't bring himself to turn away. He had to stay, had to watch, had to uncover what had happened to the old man and his loyal dog. Because this park, this bench, and the simple acts of kindness that had woven a connection between him and them had become a vital part of his world, a world he wasn't ready to surrender just yet. The days blurred together, each one a repetition of the last. Every afternoon, at the same time, the man in the expensive suit appeared in the park, always accompanied by his watchful, ever-vigilant bodyguard. They would linger for a time, as though waiting for something, some anticipated arrival that never came before leaving abruptly, their departure heavy with unspoken words and a lingering sense of unfinished business. Daniel, who had once eagerly approached the bench with hope in his heart, yearning to see the familiar faces of the old man and his dog, found those hopes slowly fading. Yet, he couldn't help but return each day, tethered to the park by a strange, inexplicable curiosity that refused to let go. The bench, the mystery that had suddenly wrapped itself around his quiet life, held him captive, drawing him back again and again, even when the old comfort had long since vanished. Then, one day, something changed. As Daniel approached the bench with his usual cautious hope, his heart heavy with uncertainty, the man in the suit was there again, this time closer than ever before. For the first time since his strange appearances had begun, the man's gaze shifted, landing directly on Daniel. Their eyes met, and for a split second, Daniel felt as though the man could see straight through him, as though he were no longer just a silent observer hiding in the shadows. The man's expression changed, softening with a flicker of recognition. Startled, Daniel froze, every muscle in his body tensing in preparation for whatever might come next. His mind whirled with questions, fear mingling with curiosity, as he braced himself for the unknown. Would the man speak to him? Would he demand to know what Daniel had been doing all this time, watching from a distance? Or would he simply walk away, leaving Daniel with more questions than answers? The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, and Daniel could feel his pulse quicken as he waited, unsure of what this sudden shift in attention could mean for him, for the mystery that had taken hold of his once simple world. "Hey kid," the man called out, his voice surprisingly gentle, a tone that seemed at odds with his intimidating appearance. Daniel stiffened, his heart pounding in his chest as he heard the stranger's voice cut through the silence of the park. The man continued, "I've seen you here before. My people tell me you're a regular. Tell me, have you seen an old homeless man around here? He's usually with a large black dog." The question sent a jolt through Daniel, his heart skipping a beat. Seen him? Of course he had seen him every single day, in fact. He had watched the old man from afar, quietly fascinated by the simplicity of his life and the joyful companionship he shared with his loyal dog. But now, faced with this well-dressed stranger's intense curiosity, Daniel's mind swirled with questions. Why was this man, with his tailored suit and bodyguard, so invested in finding a homeless man? What could possibly connect them? And why was Daniel suddenly drawn into this mysterious orbit, a part of something far bigger than himself? A lump formed in Daniel's throat, and he swallowed hard, his voice tentative and cautious as he responded. "Yes, I've seen him," he managed to say, trying to keep the nervous tremor out of his voice. On the surface, he tried to appear calm, but inside, his thoughts were a chaotic whirlpool of confusion and unease. So this is who he's been waiting for all this time, Daniel thought, the realization settling in. But the most pressing question, the why, remained unanswered, gnawing at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. What could a man like him want with a homeless person, Daniel wondered, his mind leaping to the most dramatic conclusions. Maybe the old man had stolen something valuable, a wallet, or perhaps something even more precious, and now this stranger was here seeking revenge. Or maybe something far darker was at play. As these thoughts spun wildly in his mind, Daniel recalled the grim stories his father had once told him about the dangers lurking in the world. What if this man is involved in something sinister, like the black market for organs? Daniel thought, his pulse quickening with fear. His father had warned him that vulnerable people, like the homeless, could easily become prey for such crimes. As these terrifying thoughts consumed him, Daniel couldn't help but clench his fists, his gaze locking onto the man's eyes with a mixture of suspicion and fear. The stranger in the suit, noticing the boy's unease, seemed to soften his expression. He offered a reassuring smile, a small gesture that seemed to acknowledge Daniel's fear and attempt to put him at ease. "Don't be afraid," the man said softly, his voice calm and measured. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, moving slowly so as not to startle Daniel further. From his pocket he carefully pulled out an old, yellowed photograph, the edges frayed and worn from years of handling. There was a gentleness to the way he held the picture, a reverence that didn't go unnoticed. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he continued, handing the photograph to Daniel with a look of quiet sincerity. "I'm just looking for someone who's very important to me." Daniel hesitated for a moment before accepting the photograph. His eyes widened as he looked down at the faded image. It was a picture of a younger man, but there was no mistaking the familiar features, the same kind eyes, the gentle smile. The realization hit Daniel like a wave, washing over him with a mix of surprise and understanding. "This is my father," the man said, his voice tinged with both sadness and hope. The words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight that Daniel could feel deep in his chest. He looked up at the stranger, his fear beginning to fade as the truth slowly unfolded before him. This wasn't about revenge or something sinister. It was about family. Daniel hesitated for a brief moment before accepting the photograph, his curiosity gradually overcoming the fear that had initially gripped him. Holding the old picture in his hands, he studied it carefully, trying to piece together the puzzle that was slowly unfolding before him. The man in the photograph looked nothing like the homeless figure Daniel had grown accustomed to seeing in the park. The photo showed a man who had once been well-groomed, wearing a neat suit with his hair perfectly combed and his face clean-shaven. He was smiling warmly, standing tall and proud as he held the hand of a young boy who looked to be about Daniel's age. The boy in the picture had an innocent, hopeful expression, his wide eyes brimming with the boundless optimism of youth. It took a moment for Daniel to realize that the child in the photograph was none other than a younger version of the man standing before him. The resemblance was unmistakable, the same eyes, the same hopeful look, now weathered by years of life's hardships. Daniel's heart softened as he looked from the photo to the man, sensing the depth of the story that lay between them. "You see, kid, my father and I, we had a falling out many years ago," the man began, his voice thick with the weight of regret. His gaze fell to the ground, and he seemed to retreat inward, lost in memories that still haunted him. "Back then I was hot-headed, quick to anger, always convinced I knew better. I had no patience for my father's ways, no respect for the wisdom that came with his years. I mocked his traditions, his beliefs, all the things he cherished. I thought they were relics of the past, outdated, useless. And I was so certain, so damn certain, that I understood life better than he ever could." He paused, the silence stretching between them as his words hung in the air like a confession. His eyes clouded over with the burden of those memories, and Daniel could sense the deep sorrow in his voice. The man took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his past mistakes. My arrogance drove us apart, he continued, his tone softer now, filled with a sadness that seemed to seep into every word. I said things I can never take back. I did things I'll regret for the rest of my life. Eventually, I walked away, thinking I didn't need him, that I was better off on my own. But life has a way of humbling you, of showing you just how wrong you can be. Years passed, and I came to realize that all those things I dismissed as foolish were the very things that had given my father strength, the things that had made him the man he was. Daniel listened intently, the tension that had once gripped his body slowly melting away as the story began to take shape. This wasn't the sinister tale his imagination had conjured. It wasn't about revenge or danger. It was a story about loss, about regret, and the deep yearning to make amends before time ran out. The man before him wasn't a villain, he was a son searching for his father, the very person Daniel had quietly admired from a distance in the park. "I've been looking for him," the man said, his voice barely more than a whisper now, as if the weight of his search was too much to bear. "I've been trying to find him, to make things right, but it's not easy. He's been on the streets for so long, and every time I think I'm close, he slips away again. I don't even know if he'll ever forgive me, but I have to try. I have to find him." The raw vulnerability in the man's voice struck Daniel deeply. The picture he had once imagined of this stranger was replaced by the image of a son desperately seeking reconciliation, chasing after a connection that had once been severed by pride and time. The homeless man Daniel had watched so many times in the park was not just a passerby, he was the father this man was longing to find. Daniel felt a wave of emotions wash over him: sympathy, understanding, and an unexpected sense of connection to this man, whose story had suddenly become so real, so personal. The park, the bench, the old man and his dog, they were all pieces of a puzzle that was finally coming together. And in that moment, Daniel realized that he wasn't just a bystander in this story. He had a part to play, a chance to help bring a father and son back together, to be the friend and ally he had always longed to be. With a deep breath, Daniel looked up at the man, his own voice steady and resolute as he spoke. "I've seen your father," he said, "and I'll help you find him." The man's voice, once steady, began to tremble with the weight of his memories. His eyes, which had previously seemed cold and distant, now glistened with unspoken pain, a reflection of the deep wounds that had yet to heal. His story, woven from threads of youthful mistakes and hard-earned regrets, transformed Daniel's perception of the man standing before him. Suddenly, the well-dressed stranger wasn't just a figure of authority or power, he was someone who had walked a difficult path, someone who had lost his way and was now trying to make amends. The man paused, as if the heaviness of his past was too much to bear all at once. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts, before continuing with his story. "I left my parents' house at a young age," he began again, his voice now softer, almost reflective. "I couldn't stand their constant moralizing, their advice that I saw as suffocating. I was determined to prove that I could make it on my own, that I didn't need them or their old-fashioned views holding me back. I threw myself into building my own business, believing that success, money, and independence were all that mattered, that they were the key to happiness." He smiled bitterly at the memory, his eyes clouding over with the realization of just how wrong he had been. "And for a while it seemed like I had it all figured out. The money flowed in like water, and with it came the luxury, dining in the finest restaurants, wearing suits tailored by the best designers, and being surrounded by beautiful, influential people. I thought I was living the dream. But my father, always the cautious one, warned me. He told me to reinvest in my business, to save for the future instead of indulging in the present. But I didn't listen. I was too blinded by my own arrogance, too sure that I had it all under control. I felt invincible, like I was at the top of the world, and that nothing could bring me down." The man's voice faltered as he recalled those days, and Daniel could see the pain in his eyes, the pain of someone who had learned too late that the world was far less forgiving than he had imagined. He took another deep breath, trying to dispel the weight that hung over him. "But I was wrong, so wrong," the man continued, his voice now laced with regret. "I began spending more and more time in casinos, where luck seemed to smile on me at first. But as the stakes got higher, so did the losses. I started losing significant amounts of money, and before I knew it, I was in trouble, real trouble. But that wasn't the worst of it. The real blow came when a relationship with a girl whose father had more power than I could have ever imagined ended in disaster." Daniel listened intently, feeling the tension in the air grow as the man shared the most painful parts of his story. The boy could almost feel the weight of the man's past pressing down on him, as though the memories were tangible, heavy things that had never fully left him. "She became pregnant," the man said quietly, almost as if he were confessing a sin. "And I, being the selfish, ambitious fool that I was, refused to marry her. I was too consumed by my desire for freedom, too afraid of being tied down. I had just broken free from my parents' control and couldn't bear the thought of anything or anyone holding me back. But her father found out. And that's when everything fell apart. He used his influence to destroy my business, to strip me of everything I had built. In no time, I was drowning in debt, with creditors threatening not just me, but my family. They wanted their money, and they were willing to do whatever it took to get it." The man paused again, his hands trembling slightly as he recalled those dark days. Daniel could see the raw emotion in his face, the regret that seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the man, despite the mistakes he had made. "In my desperation, I went back to my father," the man said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was honest with him. I didn't hide anything. I told him everything, every detail of how I had failed. And in his eyes, I saw disappointment, not because of the money, but because I had ignored his advice. Because I had thrown away everything he had tried to teach me. That look in his eyes was more painful than any threat the creditors could have made." The man's voice cracked, and he took a moment to collect himself. Daniel could see the deep sadness etched into his features, the guilt that had clearly haunted him for years. "My father asked me to come back the next day," the man continued, his voice now barely more than a whisper. "And when I did, he had already gathered the money I needed. He gave it to me, without hesitation, even though his own affairs were struggling. I thought that would be the end of it, that I could repay my debts, start over, and make things right. But a few months later, when I returned to thank him, I found out that he had sold everything, his house, his business, everything, just to give me that money. And then he disappeared. No note, no explanation. He just vanished." Daniel's heart clenched as he listened, imagining the immense weight of that realization. The man's father had sacrificed everything for him, only to vanish without a trace, leaving behind nothing but the guilt of his son's past mistakes. "I moved to a new city after that," the man said quietly. "I had to start over, to rebuild my life from scratch. And somehow I did. Things slowly got better, and I began to recover. But the guilt never left me. I tried to find my father, to repay him, to show him that I had changed. But no matter how hard I searched, I couldn't find him. It was as if he had disappeared from the face of the earth." The man sighed, the weight of years of searching and regret clear in his eyes. "And then, recently, one of his old friends contacted me. He told me he had seen my father in this park, walking with a large black dog. That's why I've been coming here, every day, hoping to see him, to finally make things right. But every time I come, he's nowhere to be found. Maybe he's seen me and he's avoiding me. Maybe he doesn't want to face me after everything that happened." The man's voice trailed off, and Daniel could see the vulnerability in him, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he could still find redemption. The boy felt a lump in his throat as he realized that this man, despite all his wealth and success, was just as lost as anyone else. And in that moment, Daniel knew that he had to help him, that this was his chance to be the friend, the ally he had always longed to be. With a steadying breath, Daniel looked up at the man, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I've seen your father," he said softly, "and I'll help you find him." The man's voice wavered, a fragile mix of hope and fear as he finished his story, his gaze, intense with anticipation, locked onto the boy. "Now, tell me, have you seen this man with the dog here, and does he look like the man in the photo?" he asked, his words heavy with the weight of years of searching, hoping, and regretting. Daniel, despite his young age, met the man's gaze with a calm and confident smile, a touch of maturity reflecting in his eyes. "Yes, I've seen him. It was definitely him. Though it's hard to recognize him now. He has a big black beard, completely gray. But his eyes, those laughing eyes, they haven't changed a bit. It's definitely him, 100%. The man let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Relief washed over his face, softening his hardened features, but the worry remained. "Thank God, that's something at least. Now I know he's alive. But how do I meet him?" His voice, though calmer, still trembled with uncertainty. Daniel paused thoughtfully, then spoke with surprising determination. "You should go home and stop coming here for a while. As long as you're here, he won't show up. You're intimidating, and with security too. It's hard not to notice you. And it probably scares him. It's better if you leave me your phone number. I'm here almost every day. If your father shows up again, I'll talk to him and tell him you want to meet." The man considered the boy's words, nodding slowly as though the realization was dawning on him. "Yes, you're probably right," he admitted with a resigned sigh. "After everything I've done, he likely won't want to talk to me. I've condemned him to a hard life. But please try to convince him to meet me. I would be very grateful." His voice was filled with genuine gratitude, yet tinged with emptiness, as though he had placed the last of his hopes on this boy, hoping that he could bridge the chasm of broken connections. More than 2 weeks passed since Daniel had last seen the old man and his dog in the park. Despite his worries that they might never return, the boy continued to visit every day, driven by a quiet resolve to keep the promise he had made to himself. He would check the bench, no matter what, holding on to the hope that one day, the elderly stranger would come back. Then, one cool autumn morning, when the wind played with the golden leaves, Daniel's perseverance was finally rewarded. There, sitting on the familiar bench, was the old man, and his loyal dog lay at his feet, basking in the soft morning sunlight. Daniel's heart raced with excitement and anticipation as he quickly reached into his backpack, pulling out an apple, the same gesture of peace he had offered so many times before. With a mixture of nervousness and determination, Daniel approached the bench. "Good day to you," he greeted, his voice trembling slightly with excitement as he extended the apple. The dog, sensing the boy's approach, let out a low growl of warning. But the old man, calm and reassuring, patted his faithful companion's head. "Easy, boy, easy," he said soothingly. Then, looking up at Daniel, he smiled warmly. "Don't be afraid of him. He's friendly, just a bit protective." The old man's eyes twinkled with recognition as he took in the sight of the boy. "So, it was you who's been leaving me those apples all this time?" he asked, his face lighting up with a warmth that surprised Daniel. Daniel nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and relief. The old man continued, "Well, let's get acquainted properly then, my friend. I'm sorry I haven't been around for a while. I had some things to take care of, and there was someone I didn't particularly want to run into." Taking a deep breath, Daniel replied with a newfound seriousness in his voice. "I know everything. I met your son while you were away. He loves you very much, misses you, and he asked me to apologize on his behalf." The old man's smile faded, replaced by a deep sorrow that clouded his eyes. His voice trembled as he spoke, tears welling up. "Oh, so that's what this is about. Do you know what he did, that boy of mine?" "I know," Daniel said softly. "He told me everything. And I think it's time to let go of the anger and allow him to apologize. He's not the same person he used to be. People change. They grow up. Your son, he's in touch with your grandson now. And he's doing everything he can to help him. And if the woman who bore his child could forgive him for all the pain he caused her, then maybe you can forgive him too, or at least try." The old man listened, his gaze fixed on Daniel, as if trying to find truth in the boy's words. His voice was softer when he finally spoke, filled with a glimmer of hope that had been buried deep within him for so long. "Do you really think he's changed? That he's become better?" Daniel nodded, his eyes reflecting the conviction in his heart. "I do. He's trying, and he needs you to give him a chance. He's been coming to the park every day, hoping to find you, to make things right. But he thinks you're avoiding him because you're still hurt by everything that happened." The old man looked down at his weathered hands, his mind deep in thought. After a long pause, he sighed heavily, then looked back at Daniel with quiet resolve in his eyes. Maybe it's time. Maybe I've held on to this anger for too long." Daniel smiled, relief flooding through him. "I can talk to him for you," he offered gently. "I can help you both find your way back to each other." The old man returned the smile, tears now freely falling from his eyes, though there was finally a glimmer of hope within them. "Thank you, lad. I don't know what the future holds, but maybe it's time to find out." "Yes, I'm sure of it. I swear," Daniel laughed, trying to break the tension that lingered between them. His lightheartedness brought a small smile to the old man's lips. "Well, okay," the old man finally conceded, his voice softening. "Tell him I'm willing. I'll be waiting for him here tomorrow at the same time." His nod of agreement marked the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter that had taken years of silence and pain to reach. The next morning, the park was bathed in the gentle warmth of the rising sun. The cool air carried a promise of change, and everything felt unusually calm. On the familiar old bench, the father waited, his heart racing in anticipation of seeing his son again after so many years. The man who had once distanced himself from his father through pride and mistakes now walked down the path slowly, every step weighted with both fear and hope. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of nervousness and longing propelling him forward. As father and son finally met, their eyes locked in a gaze that was filled with unspoken emotions, anxiety, regret, but most of all, hope. They stood still for a moment, neither daring to move, before finally they embraced. At first it was hesitant, cautious, but as the seconds passed, the embrace grew tighter, filled with years of longing, forgiveness, and the desire to make up for lost time. "Dad," the son began, his voice trembling with emotion. "I've imagined this moment so many times, but now that it's here, I don't even know where to begin." The father smiled gently, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. "Just speak, son," he said softly. "We both made mistakes, and I'm the last person to judge you. I'm just glad you're here." Those simple words from his father melted the tension that had built up inside the son for years. They sat down on the bench, and slowly the conversation began to flow. The son spoke of his travels, of the mistakes that had haunted him, and how the absence of his father had left an unfillable void in his heart. He shared stories of his business ventures, the highs and the lows, and how every time he faced a challenge, he found himself thinking back to the lessons his father had tried to teach him. The father, in turn, shared the story of his own journey. He spoke of how he had lost everything, but found solace in the simplicity of life. He told his son about his faithful dog, a loyal companion who had helped him through his loneliness. And then he spoke of the small acts of kindness he had received, like the apples that mysteriously appeared on his bench each day, reminders that there was still goodness in the world. As their conversation naturally turned to the wounds of the past, they both found the strength to admit their faults. The son apologized for his pride, for his stubbornness, for ignoring his father's guidance when it mattered most. He acknowledged that he had let his ambition blind him to what was truly important. The father, in turn, expressed his own regrets. "I was too strict," he admitted, his voice heavy with the weight of his own failures. "I should have been there for you, supported you better, instead of pushing you away. But I want you to know something: I was always proud of you, even if I didn't show it." The son's eyes filled with tears as he took his father's hands in his own. "I'm proud of you too," Daddy whispered, "and I'm grateful for all the lessons you taught me, even if I didn't understand them at the time." They walked together through the park after that, the air between them lighter, filled with the possibilities of the future rather than the burdens of the past. As they talked, they began to make plans, tentative steps toward rebuilding their relationship. The son suggested that his father return home with him, that they try to reconnect and start over. The father hesitated, doubt flickering in his eyes. He had grown used to his freedom, to the quiet life he had carved out for himself, but he also knew that healing old wounds required taking chances. "Let's give it a try," the father finally said, his voice filled with cautious hope. "Maybe this is the second chance I've been dreaming of." And so, they continued walking together, their conversation weaving the past into the present, creating a new bridge across the years of separation. With each step, the world seemed a little less frightening, a little less lonely, now that they had each other again. That autumn evening, as Daniel made his way home, a newfound understanding of life and family began to settle in his heart. The chance encounter in the park, the unexpected meeting with the son of a vagrant, and the reunion of a family that had been broken for so long had shed light on many things in Daniel's own life. He found himself thinking about his father, about all the times he hadn't fully understood his father's concerns, the worries that had seemed unnecessary or overbearing. When Daniel arrived home, he was greeted by silence. His father was still at work, and the house felt empty. It gave Daniel the perfect opportunity to be alone with his thoughts. He went up to his room and sat by the window, letting the memories of the day replay in his mind. The image of the old man and his son embracing, the raw emotion in their voices, stayed with him, lingering in the quiet of the evening. For the first time, Daniel began to see his own father in a different light. The complexities of relationships, the weight of unspoken words, and the value of forgiveness all took on new meaning. He realized that, just like the old man and his son, there were bridges to be built in his own life, connections to be strengthened before time slipped away. As he sat there, watching the last rays of the sun dip below the horizon, Daniel silently promised himself that he would make an effort to understand his father better, to appreciate the love that often hid behind concern. In the stillness of his room, he felt a warmth growing inside him, a warmth that came from knowing that no matter how complicated life might get, there was always hope for mending what had been broken. As Daniel stood there, holding the leash of his new puppy, Charlie, he felt a surge of emotions rush through him. The man who had once seemed so lost, so defeated by life, was now standing tall, looking healthy and strong. Beside him, his son Jonathan, dressed in an elegant suit, exuded the same confidence that had once seemed distant and unreachable. The transformation in both father and son was nothing short of remarkable. Daniel's father, Richard, smiled warmly, sensing the significance of the moment. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Edward," he said, gripping the man's hand firmly. "And you too, Jonathan. Daniel spoke of you often, of the apples, the park, and everything that happened here. It's wonderful to see you both doing so well." Edward's eyes softened as he looked at Daniel, then at Richard. "Thank you," he replied, his voice filled with gratitude. "Your son played a much bigger role in our lives than he probably knows. Those apples, they weren't just a kind gesture. They were a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is still kindness in the world." Jonathan, who had been listening quietly, nodded in agreement. "Daniel's kindness gave me the courage to reach out to my father, to mend what had been broken between us. It's not easy to find forgiveness after so many years of silence and pain, but we're working on it. And it's because of him." Richard looked at his son with pride, his heart swelling with emotion. He had always known that Daniel was special, but seeing the impact his son had on others, on complete strangers, brought a new level of understanding to their relationship. He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, squeezing it gently. "I'm proud of you, son," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Daniel smiled up at his father, feeling a deep connection between them, a connection that had grown stronger over the past few months. The puppy at his feet tugged playfully at the leash, bringing a lightness to the moment that made everyone smile. Edward looked down at the little dog, his eyes twinkling. "It seems you've got yourself a new friend there, Daniel," he said warmly. "Charlie, right? I have a feeling he's going to bring you as much joy as my dog brought me." Daniel beamed, feeling the warmth of the moment wash over him. "Yeah, Charlie's great. He's already part of the family." As the conversation flowed, the four of them, Richard, Daniel, Edward, and Jonathan, found themselves walking together through the park, their dogs running happily ahead. The once strained relationships had given way to something new, something hopeful. The park, with its golden and crimson leaves, seemed to mirror the change in their lives, a season of renewal, of healing, of second chances. Edward and Jonathan spoke about their plans, how they were rebuilding their lives together, and how the simple act of forgiveness had opened doors they thought had been closed forever. Richard shared stories of his own, of the challenges of raising Daniel and the lessons they had both learned along the way. There was laughter, there were moments of reflection, and above all, there was a sense of peace that hung in the air. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the park, the group came to a stop near the old bench that had once been the meeting place for so many silent gestures of kindness. Edward turned to Daniel, his expression sincere. "Thank you, Daniel. You reminded me that even the smallest acts of kindness can change lives. I'll never forget what you did for us." Daniel nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "I just wanted to help," he said simply. "I'm glad you and your son are okay." With that, the two families parted ways, each heading off in their own direction, but with hearts that were lighter and more connected than ever before. As Daniel and his father walked home, the autumn air cool against their faces, Daniel couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. "Dad," he said softly, "maybe I've been too hard on you sometimes. Maybe you face difficult choices too, ones I don't even know about." Richard looked down at his son, his expression tender. "We all face difficult choices, Daniel. But what matters most is that we try to understand each other, to forgive when we make mistakes. I've learned that from you." Daniel nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle in his heart. The lessons he had learned in the park from Edward, from Jonathan, and from his own father had given him a new perspective on life, on family, and on the importance of forgiveness. As they walked together with Charlie happily trotting along beside them, Daniel knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with understanding, with kindness, and with love. And in that moment, as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, Daniel felt the world open up before him, a world filled with endless possibilities, with second chances, and with the knowledge that even the smallest acts of kindness could make all the difference. Richard smiled at Jonathan's words, a deep sense of pride swelling within him. "Your son's friendship and kindness truly made a difference," Jonathan continued. It inspired me to take the steps I needed to fix the situation as well. The two fathers, now bound by their shared experiences, continued to walk together, exchanging stories about raising children and the challenges that had tested them along the way. They spoke with an openness that only comes from understanding the weight of fatherhood. Meanwhile, Daniel listened quietly, holding Charlie close on a short leash. The little dog wagged its tail joyfully, sensing the warmth and calm that filled the air. As their walk went on, Richard and Edward exchanged phone numbers, solidifying their newfound friendship. The air was full of optimism, a shared belief that this connection would bring nothing but joy and growth to their lives. The world felt a little brighter, and the possibilities ahead seemed endless. As the two families began to part ways, Daniel felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The events of the past few weeks had taught him that true change often begins with the smallest acts of kindness: an apple on a bench, a listening ear, or a simple gesture of compassion. These little things had set in motion something far greater, creating ripples that had changed the lives of those around him. And as they walked away, Daniel looked up at his father, feeling a connection stronger than ever before. Together they walked side by side, Charlie happily trotting along, knowing that whatever challenges came their way, they would face them with understanding, with kindness, and with love. As we come to the end of Daniel's story, there's a lot to reflect on. What have you learned from this tale of kindness, forgiveness, and second chances? In life, even the smallest acts of compassion can create ripples that lead to something far greater. We'd love to hear from you. Comment below and share one thing you've learned from this story that you'll bring into your own life. If you like this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue to bring you more stories that inspire and uplift.